Holy shit. Anybody looking to get divorced out there, just build some furniture together. Welcome in to another episode of the Story Lesson Advice Podcast. I'm Justin, the host. Thank you very much for tuning in. This podcast is part of Saturday is Datterday Media. Videos, podcasts, blogs, eventually books, all in due time. Feel free to check out my website, sidmedia.net. It's where you can find more videos, blogs, all the links to the podcast, all that sort of stuff. Also, I will be releasing a new podcast after the holiday that is going to be focused on book reviews because I hate reading. And the name of the podcast, wouldn't you know it, is I Hate Reading. So I'm going to give a down and dirty review of books that have been impactful to me that I've really enjoyed reading reluctantly, but I've actually enjoyed them, and give you my opinion from a non-reader reader. So, all right, I said, holy shit, you want to get divorced, build some furniture. So kidding about the divorce part, but what I do want to talk about is this kind of overarching theme, and I'm going to illustrate it in a story. And the story is the engagement of my wife and I, Beth. And this happened in November of 2012. I remember it like it was yesterday. But the reason I'm going to tell this story is at the end, hopefully it'll make some sense. So we were getting ready to go on a long weekend trip to Chicago. We lived in Dallas at the time, and we were just dating. We were not engaged yet. And I had months earlier talked to my father and talked to her family and had everything ready to go. I had the engagement ring, and we were leaving the next morning. And I'm sitting in the living room of our apartment, just nervous in the service. My wife is in the bathroom doing something, and I picked up a magazine nervously and I thumbed through it, and it was one of her magazines because we used to read magazines back in the day. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, there's a little clip of an article there that says, for guys. And this was like the most random thing that happened, but it was like for a guy's piece of advice or something, like a guy's column that was in the women's magazine. And it said, if you are traveling with an engagement ring, and you're going to do a destination engagement, make sure that you do not pack it in your suitcase. Put it in your carry-on. Now, that may seem obvious to everyone in the world, but it was not obvious to me. And I had the ring tucked away, nestled, if you will, in the suitcase. So I had to scramble in like 20 seconds to get out of the suitcase, put it in my backpack without my wife knowing anything. And I pulled that off. Great. So we get to the airport. Everybody's got one of those stories where you're running late and you're literally running through the airport at full tilt. I talked about that back at the first episode of this season, us trying to make connecting flights back home. But we had that experience running late through TSA, literally the last two people on the plane, but we got seated. We're good to go. We're flying, and my wife asks me something to the effect of, or says something to the effect of, hope you're planning an engagement this weekend, or it would be really nice if I came back with a ring or something like that. And something to that effect. And when you get put in that position, what are you supposed to say? I had the ring sitting right there down on the ground in my backpack under the seat in front of me, but it was going to be a surprise for that night. So I don't remember what I said. My wife, I think, is very clear on this, but I think she said that I told her something along the lines of like, I'm not ready to marry you, or I don't know if you're wife material or whatever. I hope to God I didn't say that, but according to her, I said something along those lines, or, I'm just not ready. I just want to have a fun weekend or whatever. So the rest of the flight, my wife was just furiously thumbing through her magazines and just, almost the pages ripping out. And I was like, oh, great. We haven't even landed yet, and I'm already in trouble. So anyway, I think we calmed down. We ended up walking around for a few hours, and when we got settled in Chicago and everything, and walking up and down Michigan Avenue, and the whole time, I could tell she was sad or mad, or maybe both, and I was uncomfortable because it didn't go well or whatever. So anyway, that night, like I planned, I was going to propose, and it was cold, and we ended up going to Navy Pier, which is where I wanted to propose to her on the Ferris wheel in Navy Pier. Now, I hate heights. Like for me, if I am standing up, it is too high for me. That's basically my fear of heights. But I thought that would be a really cool experience and something different, something a little bit more unique. So that's where we ended up doing it. Top of the Ferris wheel. I'm freaking out. I don't even remember what I said. She said yes. All was forgiven. When I kind of told her the story of like why I said what I said, even though it was the wrong thing to say. So we're all excited. We get off the Ferris wheel and it's at Navy Pier and it was at night during the week. So we're looking for somewhere where we can go quickly to have our first celebratory drink, call our families, do all that stuff. We looked around and the only place that was open at the time at Navy Pier was Bubba Gump. So what do? You go in, you make the best of it. So we went into Bubba Gump to have our first celebratory drink as a newly engaged couple and are promptly greeted by a pregnant smoking bartender. Now, I don't know if she was really pregnant, but I think she was. And she was smoking. And we came in, we're grinning from ear to ear and telling her, hey, we just got engaged. And she couldn't have cared less. And we asked if she had champagne or something like that. And apparently they were out of it. So all they had at the time was Miller Lite. So we were like 5 minutes before they were going to close. And so we spent our very first drink, the very first moments after our engagement, was spent at a Bubba Gump drinking Miller Lite served to us by a pregnant smoking bartender while we called our parents. So that did not meet the expectation of, I think, what either one of us had when we thought about how we would celebrate our engagement. All right, now it's time for this week's sponsor, I Wish I Had. And this week, the sponsor I wish I had is something that I have discovered maybe 3 or 4 months ago. My wife discovered it, actually, and she and I have been using it regularly because both of us try to drink a lot of water throughout the day. Both of us used to, years ago, drink a ton of diet soda every day. I used to work in outside sales, so I would grab, a 20 ounce of Diet Mountain Dew, a 20 ounce of Diet A&W, a 20 ounce of Diet Dr. Pepper, and that was usually what got me at least through the mid-afternoon. But I would drink a ton of soda every day, and so would my wife. And about probably 6 or 7 years ago, we both just kind of said, like, all right, we got to stop drinking diet soda. We got to start drinking more water. So we discovered sparkling water, and we started just dominating cans of sparkling water like it was going out of style. And Topo Chico, which is the greatest sparkling water in the world. So we were just slamming that stuff. And it was good because we both like the carbonated fizz that you get from soda, but we're like, hey, we're drinking sparkling water. But a lot of the stuff that we were drinking had, flavor additives and all of that. So was it better than drinking soda? I don't know, maybe. So we said, all right, we got to do kind of our own thing. So we just kind of switched to just drinking water. And then intermittently we would, sprinkle in a sparkling water or Gatorade Zero or whatever. But we were still looking for something that just, once a day, twice a day, kind of at the most, just giving us a little bit of flavor, a little bit different experience than just a gallon of water all day long. So lo and behold, living in Arizona, it's 120 degrees outside during the summer, we stumbled upon Ultima Replenisher. And this is a hydration powder that you can put in your water, mix it up, and it is super flavorful. It bumps up your electrolytes, rehydrates you. There's a little bit of sodium in there to make sure if you're sweating it off all day long, that you can still recover from it, from the experience. And this is the flavor that we're using today, which is a cherry pomegranate. It is absolutely awesome. We have one at our house. My wife has one at our office. Take about 1 scoop a day, sometimes 2 scoops a day if we're really outside a lot or whatever. I throw it in about 30 ounces of water, and that's just a really great break from just drinking regular water, and it's hydrating, and it's electrolytes, and all the things. So I highly recommend Ultima Replenisher if you are looking for a break, you're looking to try to make sure you stick to water, but just kind of need something once in a while. Or if you're like I am, and you're out in the desert, and the summertime is just unbearable. So if you're outside, if you're on a golf course, maybe if you've had too much to drink the night before and you need something, or even during your drinking extravaganza, break it up with one of these to hydrate yourself. So Ultima Replenisher, this week's sponsor. I wish I had. All right, so the engagement story, not really that crazy, but kind of fun in how the way that it ended of us sitting at a Bubba Gump drinking Miller Lite in front of a pregnant smoking bartender while we tried to call our parents and family and let them know that we were happily engaged. The reason that I told that story is because I think oftentimes in my own life, and maybe somebody else listening can relate to this, is that my expectation does not match my reality of what happens. And the reason it does that most of the time is not because the reality is not what it should be. It's because my expectations are not what they should be. And I had to kind of do some self-examination over the last couple of years of what my expectations are about all the different facets in my life. And when I get right down to it, the lesson that I learn is my expectations do not match my reality in a lot of instances because one of two things. One, I have unrealistic expectations of what the situation is or could be just in and of itself. Or two, I have unrealistic expectations of what that situation is or could be compared to what I have done to make it that type of a thing. So, two examples. One would be as a married couple, having time together, date nights, having adult conversations, having a little sexy time, whatever you want to call it. That stuff is going to ebb and flow and ups and downs. And when it has ups and when it has downs, oftentimes that is because the people involved are making or not making the effort, whether it's just having time every day to talk about stuff or to make sure that we go on date nights, make sure to continue to date your spouse, continue to do nice things for your spouse. You know, what I noticed is when I'm not putting in that effort, and it's good effort, but when I'm not putting that effort and that work in, then how can I expect to have the same type of result compared to when I was putting the work in and when I was putting the effort in? So if I'm not making time in my schedule to be able to spend time with my wife to talk about the budget or just talk about life, or if I'm not asking her to go out on a date with me every couple of weeks or every month over a long period of time to be able to just have some grown-up time, then why would I expect that our conversational life or our date life is going to be just awesome? If I'm not one of the people putting the work in, then why would I have the expectation that it would be any differently? And I think it's very easy for us today. Everything we see on social media, everything we see on TV, it's dialed to 11, and that's just not reality. You know, the funny thing is like you watch any show or movie or whatever, anytime there's a sex scene, it's like, you know, the most passionate, the most greatest, the most wild chandelier hanging sex in the world. And it's like, okay, that's not reality for most people most of the time, right? Same thing you see, the Marvel movies, all the leading actors that were just completely jacked, and what that represented for a lot of guys, myself included, is that's just not realistic for most people, even if you're doing everything in your power. So I think there's that aspect of it. And then the other part of it, I said, is just as having unrealistic expectations compared to the reality just in and of itself. And if you walk into an expectation, if you walk into a situation with an expectation, then I think you're setting yourself up potentially to be let down and to play into the negativity of your ego and let resentment and all that kind of stuff build up. Now, there's a difference between, hey, I have an expectation that when I get in my car, it starts, or that the door shuts in my house, or, you know, when I go to the grocery store, the cash registers are working for self-checkout, those kind of things. So I'm talking about a great example would be a movie, for example. I just talked about Marvel. But when you think about movies, and I'm a big fan of movies, including a lot of the Marvel movies, you have a tendency to go into those or any movie that you might like, and you focus on what it isn't as opposed to what it is. And a lot of people get upset about that. So you can figure that out about a movie, a dinner with friends, having a day to go shopping or playing golf or whatever. But if you have a set of expectations that are outside of like, hey, I'm just going to go do the thing, or I'm just going to go watch the thing. If you have an outside expectation that's usually driven by ego, by need, by desire, by a want versus just experiencing it. And then oftentimes you end up focusing on the things that it isn't as opposed to appreciating it and just experiencing it for the things that it is. All right. In this week's Just the Tip segment, it's another food, just the tip, and it's a super simple one, but it has served me well over the years, especially with a young daughter. One of the things I didn't know I loved until I had a daughter was pancakes. And I like pancakes fine or whatever, but a lot of times they're not super flavorful. And I, as a shocker, don't particularly love the taste of butter. I don't mind it if it's in a sauce, if it's part of a tomato sauce, or maybe if you put a little warm butter on top of a steak or whatever. But by and large, if I had a choice, I would always reach for olive oil. Instead of if you're at a dinner table and there's bread that comes to the table and butter, or bread that comes to the table with the oil and vinegar mixture, I'm always going to want the oil and vinegar mixture. But I digress. So pancakes. I never really loved pancakes because they were usually drowned in butter or syrup, and they were just kind of ho-hum. So once my daughter got old enough to start eating solid foods and having fun with food, we started making pancakes together. And the brand of pancakes that we usually just make to make it super simple is a Kodiak. And I've had that as a sponsor I wish I had last season. They are great. Kodiak does a ton of like kind of protein-focused products, oatmeal, pancake mix, make at home like oatmeal and protein bars, kind of like Bear Bites, which are like crackers. Really, really good stuff. Awesome stuff. But we get this their pancake mix, their chocolate chip pancake mix, and it's just delicious. But this applies to kind of any pancake mix. Is when you mix it and you mix it with the water and you get it to be the consistency that you want, then let it rest for about 5 minutes before you put it in the pan. So what I'll typically do is mix it up and then let it rest, turn the flame on low, get my pan on, warm. And once that's good and heated, then I'll add my oil spray or oil to the pan or butter to the pan to coat the pan. And then I'll put my pancake mix in. But I let it sit 3 to 5 minutes, maybe even 7 minutes. And the reason why is that baking powder, everything else that's in the pancakes, letting that rise get fluffy because you just whisk the hell out of it. So letting the air get all in there, letting all that happen when you then put the batter into the pan and are gentle with it and don't keep slapping it with a spatula and just turn it once if you can, you're going to find yourself that you have a really thick and super, super fluffy pancake, like exponentially more fluffy than you've had, or exponentially fluffier than you've had before. So that is this week's Just the Tip. Okay, so we talked about the story of our engagement and how we ended our engagement night, at Bubba Gump's drinking Miller Lite in front of a pregnant smoking bartender. Talked about the lesson of that is having unrealistic expectations for what you think it should be, based on what your ego kind of sometimes can drive, what your own personal wants or needs or desires can drive. And the advice that I would give would be, and I would give this advice to myself if I could go back in time. I would give this advice to my daughter when she's older and anybody else that's listening. And it would certainly have helped me over the years have a much better experience and enjoyment with a whole lot of different things. And the advice that I would give myself would be, don't let your expectation impact the experience. And a great example of this is going to be a wedding. Everybody thinks everybody says the wedding is the happiest day of your life. No, it's not. Like, your wedding day is an absolute shit show. It's long. There's lots of weird things that you're doing that you never do. There's way too many people that want, to be with you and be in front of you, which is all great. Like, that's wonderful that you have people, supporting you and wanting to be there for you. But there's so much stuff going on. Everybody says the same thing. You barely spent any time with your spouse. You barely got to talk to anybody for more than hi and thank you and are you enjoying yourself and this and that. And then it's over and you're just exhausted and there's a huge bill and all that sort of stuff. But I think oftentimes there is so much pressure, so much of an expectation built up on the wedding day that it's got to be just this perfect, magical, unbelievable experience. And when you walk into that, there's no way that it's going to live up to it. Even if you have it at the Plaza Hotel and everything is catered by a 3 Michelin star restaurant and you've got fresh flowers everywhere and everything in the world, like nothing is going to live up to the expectation that oftentimes we have in our head of what something like a wedding or whatever is going to be. And that can oftentimes get in the way of us, myself in the past and even recently probably, of just enjoying that experience for what it is. And when you think about what the best day of your life is as a married couple, people say it's your wedding day. But for me, and I think my wife would agree, it wasn't our wedding day. It was probably the third day of one of our trips to Mexico after we were married and before we had kids, when we were just hanging out, not a care in the world, because we had no expectation. We were already on vacation. All we had to do was just wake up and just enjoy ourselves and do whatever the hell we wanted to do. And if we wanted to have a mimosa at 8:30 in the morning, we did. Not that I did, but maybe I had 2 or 3 or 4 of those at 8:30 in the morning. But that's fine. That's another story. But seriously, the reason that we had such a good time is because we didn't have an expectation of what we were going to do that day. We didn't even know what we were going to do that day. We just woke up and just kind of went where the wind took us. So that is a great example of how we did not let our expectations impact our experience. And then on the flip side, something like a wedding or something like a big party, even the holidays, we're smack dab around the holidays with Thanksgiving and Christmas. There's this expectation that you've got to have something, great, this great party, this great meal, everything's got to be perfect. Like, no one cares. No one cared that at our wedding, our centerpieces were cookbooks that we rented from the library. No one cared that, my suit was something I had in my closet, and no one cared that my wife found her dress on sale, and none of that matters. But if you put all that expectation on yourself, all you're doing is setting yourself up and your ego up to be disappointed, frustrated, and even when you're in the moment feeling those things, and now that is projecting outward onto everybody else around you to that experience, and in the middle of it, like I've done in the past, the experience is less than it could be because you're focused on what it isn't as opposed to what it is. Okay, this week, the whisper in is someone that is a very, very, very talented comedian and content creator that I have been following for several years. He's from Canada, and I have a flannel shirt on, so already this is perfect. His name is Ryan George, and he is probably most well known for his YouTube series called Pitch Meeting. And every week he has like a 5-minute YouTube video where he plays 2 different characters, a studio movie executive and a studio director that is pitching a movie to the studio. And it's really funny because it breaks down how silly and ridiculous a lot of these movies are, and how giant some of these plot holes in movies are, and how stupid some of these giant media companies can be making poor decisions about the movie. And it's really, really funny. And he does a great job of pointing that stuff out in a humorous way that doesn't degrade or do anything negative to the creators or the people working on it, but really kind of shines a light on what it is. He's got a ton of other skits, and he's been around for a long time. He's got a lot of great stuff, but I will watch them over and over if I just need a laugh or if I have to have a quick lunch or something and I want to watch something on YouTube for 5 minutes. So his name is Ryan George. He's from Canada. And his how about that? His stuff is called Pitch Meeting. Go check it out on YouTube. This week's Whisper In. All right, time for the cool down as we wrap all of this up. So this week, the story, my wife and I getting engaged, having to propose on top of the Ferris wheel at Navy Pier, having a rocky start to that trip because apparently I said I wasn't ready to get married or didn't know if she was the one while I had the ring sitting in my backpack on the ground right in front of us, all the way to celebrating our engagement later that night with a Miller Lite in front of a pregnant smoking bartender at Bubblegum Shrimp because that's all we had at the time. The lesson from that really takeaway is having unrealistic expectations compared to the reality. And what drives that? I think a lot of it, I know for me, is really driven and rooted in ego and wants and needs. And when that happens, it makes the experience very, very difficult. And the advice that I would give myself would be don't let your expectations impact your experience. And the example I gave was at a wedding, your expectations are so high that it's got to be this perfect day and everything's got to be great and it's the best day of your lives. And when in reality, it's just a long day. It's a pain in the ass and you just want to get through it. And the best day of your life as a married couple is usually, the third or fourth day on a vacation when you don't have a care in the world and you're just hanging out, just the two of you as the most real version of yourselves. The sponsor I wish I had is Ultima Replenisher. That is a electrolyte and hydrating powder that you can put into water. My wife and I have been using it for several months, and it is just awesome. It's a great way to kind of break up drinking just buckets of water, oceans of water all day long. So I highly recommend checking that out. For the Just the Tip segment, it's all about pancakes. My recommendation, when you make your pancake batter, let it rest for 3 to 5 to 7 minutes, and your result is going to be the most fluffy, most delicious, most super tall Tommy pancakes that you've ever had. And the Whisper In for this is a comedian and a content personality that I've been following for years. His name is Ryan George. He is best known, and how I discovered him was on YouTube for a reoccurring weekly bit he does called Pitch Meeting, where he basically plays two different characters on a video. One of them is a producer guy, and one of them is a studio movie executive. And the producer guy pitches the movie concept to the studio executive, and he basically does this for all the famous movies over the last several years. And it's really funny because he kind of shines a light on some of the silliness and the plot holes and the poor decisions that the executive make. But I think he also does a really good job of, he doesn't, in this, because there's a lot of, kind of shining the light and making fun of things, but he doesn't do it in a way that denigrates or makes fun of the people who worked on the project. Because the people who are doing the work oftentimes, if it's not what you expect, it's usually because of time or money or both. So he does a really good job of balancing that, but just hysterical. I have watched I think every single one of them at least like 5 times. So go check them out. So that is it for this week on the Story Lesson Advice podcast. As I said, weekly blogs are going to be on sidmedia.net. That's my website for the media company, as well as weekly updates on YouTube. We have almost daily videos, clips of this podcast. I'm going to be having additional podcasts. I'm going to be doing additional videos focusing on product reviews and book reviews, culinary videos as well, leaning into my experience with that. So thank you for all of the support. Have a wonderful rest of your day whenever you're listening to this, and we'll see you next week on the Story Lesson Advice podcast.